Hey everyone, it's Rachel. So I was not planning to do a live, but I am actually on location. So right now I am at Proctor's Ledge in Salem, Massachusetts right now. And of course there's like a busy street right next to me, of course. So, hey Nora, so I'm just waiting for some people to show up because what did King Solomon tell us? There is nothing new under the sun. This passage in Ecclesiastes is for real truth. So, the reason that I wanted to talk to you is because, I'm in Massachusetts right now, and my husband's at some conference right now, so I figured, okay, let me go explore Salem, Massachusetts. And for those of you who don't know, Salem is where the Salem witch trials were in the 1690s. And also in October, this is when they have like gigantic like street fairs for witches and the occult and all of that garbage right now. So like everybody has witch hats on. There's people doing like tarot readings out. I mean, it's ridiculous. But anyway, I didn't come here for that. I came here to go on the historical walking tours and learn more about the Salem witch trials. And over and over and over again, all I can think about is how this is exactly what we're going through today. We are going through the equivalent of like a Salem witch trial with the church today, or what calls itself the church today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So, okay. So behind me are the names of 19 people who were hung, and then there was a 20th person, Giles Corey, who was crushed to death. And all of these people were falsely convicted of being witches. So let me back up and kind of explain what happened. So the reason that I really want to talk about it is not only do I see the parallels today, but it is so imperative to not get wrapped up in legalism. It's so important to ask the Holy Spirit for discernment. And number 3, it's really important to base all decisions on evidence. We are Christians because we follow the evidence. We see that there is a creator God. We see his signature in creation. We see the archaeological record that backs up the fact that there was a historical Jesus. We believe because we crack our Bible and we see that the evidence backs up the claims of the Bible. Unfortunately, a lot of people, they don't crack their Bible and they believe all sorts of crazy stuff, which basically makes them not even Christian anymore. Like you literally could not even claim to be Christian because of the things that they believe. You can see it by their fruit. Like they call themselves Christians, but there's literally nothing Christian about them. I hope you guys can hear me because of all of the street noise. So anyway, let's back up to what's going on here. So remember, there's a lot of crazy people in Europe, right? And there's a lot of tumultuous garbage going on in Europe, and you really don't want a bunch of like religious crazy fanatics on your tail on top of all of the other issues going on with running a country, right? So we had the Pilgrims. They came and settled in the United States, right? And there's already Native Americans living there. And they're constantly fighting back and forth because it's like if somebody just shows up in your backyard and they're just like, hey, I'm going to claim this land. It's like, oh, hello, somebody already lives here, correct? So, of course, the Native Americans and the Europeans constantly fighting to the death. And over time, there's more people settling, and then there's this group called the Puritans, and they decide that they're going to be the city on a hill for Jesus. They're going to be like the new Jerusalem, and they're going to have these like really legalistic, strict code of conduct, and they're going to be the shining city on a hill, the example for Jesus. And what it is just like insane legalism. So anyway, they don't have a real cool time with the natives, and the natives and them are constantly fighting, and some of the people are massacred, as as is what happens when you have these like territorial wars. And there's a town. So we have like Salem town, and then there's in the outskirts Salem village. And there is some issues going on in Salem because just like today, you have the city folk, and then you have like the people that are farmers and they live out in the rural communities. You know, there's a lot of animosity there because it's like, hey, the people in the city, they don't care about us. They look down on us because we're more rural. And Salem Village wanted to split off and create their own city so that they did not have to go into town to go to church, because it was a 7-mile ride one way to attend church, and it was legally required for everyone to attend these Puritan services. So it's like, if we have to come and there's no cars, like 7 miles is very far to go on foot if you can't afford animals. So like, I get it. I get that they want to have their own church. So the other reason that they want their own church is because they're all required to pay the salary of the reverend. And it's like, hey, if we're having to pay this guy, we want it to be at least like convenient for us to attend church when we're required to go and we're required to pay for this dude. So anyway, there has been a lot of infighting about what kind of pastor they're going to have. And of course, just like with churches today, you know, whenever there's going to be like a turnover with ministers, you have some people they want this guy, other people want this guy, and there's factions, right? So anyway, this goes on, and they go through a bunch of ministers, and they have a way of not paying their reverends. So they go through quite a few of these people before they're like, hey, we really need a minister because the other people keep leaving because we stopped paying them. So anyway, in walks this dude named Samuel Parris. Now, Samuel Parris was a failed sugar cane plantation dude from Barbados. And then he also tried his hand at being a merchant. He failed at that. So, of course, what does he do? Just like people today, they have failed at many things. So what are they going to do? They're going to join the ministry. So he goes to Harvard. He hasn't graduated yet, but he decides, like, okay, I'm going to take a post in Salem Village to be the new reverend. So he's ordained, even though he hadn't graduated from Harvard Seminary yet. And, this is the time where he feels like he needs to make a name for himself, because he's like already failed at the sugarcane plantations, which other people were like making tons of money. He already failed at being a merchant, where people were making tons of money. So he had a chip on his shoulder and he had something to prove. So he comes in already like mad at the world, like ready to prove something. And he starts preaching, and it's like whatever for a while, but he wants to grow the membership. And so what does he do to set himself apart from other pastors, other reverends, other churches? He becomes more legalistic. And it gets to the point that he's so legalistic where he's only preaching hellfire. Anybody who crosses him, anyone who tells him what to do is like an enemy of the cross. And it gets to the point where he starts telling people that they're like not allowed to take communion, and kicking people out. They're not allowed to take communion at his church because they're not technically members. And this starts upsetting people because they're having to pay his salary. So they're like, okay, we're not going to pay you, because not only are you like not letting us take communion, like you're a total jerk to everyone. Like, they're just over it. So they stop paying his salary for a year. They stop giving him firewood. And this is like in the Northeast, so it's super cold. So he has issues with that. But the thing is Samuel Paris has a friend in the Putnam family. Now, they're like a very well-off family in the city, and it's no different than politicians trying to like buy favor from religious leaders today so that they can use that influence to have their will done in the community, right? So, anyway, there are some people that the Putnam family they don't like. And of course, St. Paris, his ego is like sky high. He's made a lot of enemies, and it gets crazy. So, anyway, there's people that he doesn't like, and we have to remember there's no social services at the time. And the community would come together to help out like the poor, the widows, the orphans, the indigent, things like that. And there was this beggar woman, I believe her name was Sarah, and she had a 6-year-old daughter. She was also pregnant. She's like going door to door, and she like knocks on Samuel Paris's door, and he gives something to her daughter but not to her, and he claims that he heard Sarah mumble a curse under her breath, and then all of a sudden it starts like, oh well, she's a witch because she like dared to curse this reverend. And then Samuel Paris's niece starts having these like fits where she's claiming that there's these like apparitions, and these women are basically what we would call today astral projecting and attacking them. And they literally throw Sarah and her 6-year-old daughter in prison. She gives birth in prison. The baby dies. But it starts to spiral out of control. All of a sudden now Reverend Samuel's slave Tituba, she makes accusations saying that certain people who also didn't necessarily get along with Samuel Paris or the Putnams, like, oh no, they're also witches. And it just like it goes crazy. So it gets nuts. And all of a sudden just people all over the place are like, these people are witches, these people are witches, these people are witches. And there's these girls, they're having like these tics, and they're saying, oh no, this woman, she's coming and she's pinching me, her spirit is pinching me, or she's poking me, or whatever. And it's like, this is absolute nonsense. But it gets into like such a frenzy that people are going from town to town, taking these girls to like weed out the witches in those towns. And it just becomes like an absolute sideshow until finally either the governor or the lieutenant governor's wife gets accused of witchcraft. And they're like, hold on, we got to put a stop to this. Like, this is getting so ridiculous. And I just see parallels because like there's no reason that these people should have been accused of witchcraft. Many of these people were like upstanding members of the community. They were involved in the church. One was a reverend, where is he? George Burroughs. He actually had a falling out with the Putnams about land and finances, and then all of a sudden they're claiming that he's like the king of hell and he's the one running the whole show and he works for Satan, and there's like this cabal of witches that are like attacking children. And it's just like, what is going on? But the thing that reminds me of today is that there were people out there saying like, this is absolute insanity, this is complete nonsense, like these people aren't witches, like this is clearly people that just have grudges against certain people, and they're using their influence and their position with the reverend to go and settle the score with people that they don't like by claiming that they're witches, and then they're putting them to death. And these people were like maintaining their innocence, like, I'm not a witch. They had people that came out and said like, These people are upstanding Christians, like these people are not witches, but these people, some of them that were accused of witchcraft were considered like the dregs of society, or like they're taking up community resources, like the elderly, people who are beggars, people who are ill. There was one woman, she was bedridden, but she was in love with like an indentured servant, and that was like a class issue. But you might say like, okay, the Putnams and Samuel Parrish, but what about all of these other people that are like going crazy and having all of these tics and just all this crazy stuff? Like, what's going on? We have to remember something. Stuff does not happen in a vacuum. And what's going on? So, first of all, they're in a mini ice age. Crops are failing. There's a smallpox epidemic. People are dying. There's wars with the natives. People are dying. This is really traumatic for a lot of people. A lot of people have lost their entire families. They've lost their crops. If you lost your crops, you can't eat. You starve to death. And yeah, that's really stressful. That's very traumatic. And people want to make sense of the world that they live in. They want simple explanations, and they want somebody to blame. Because when they have these simple explanations, it's like, okay, the world makes sense to me. And we have to remember, like, this is the 1690s. And yes, we have like Descartes. We have, you know, oh my gosh, Sir Isaac Newton. Like, we have scientists, we have philosophy, but at the same time, not all of this like migrated over to the United States immediately, right? So a lot of people are still very superstitious. Not everybody is necessarily educated or even literate, and you want simple answers. Why is this stuff happening? These people over here who are in positions of power, so like a reverend, the Putnams, they're like very wealthy, they're saying this stuff's going crazy. My friends and neighbors were all gossiping about this kind of stuff. So it's easy to see why people would get wrapped up in this stuff, even though like it's obvious that like there were grudges and people were like misusing the law to like exact revenge on their neighbors and their enemies. And it's depressing because I see the same thing today. People are dealing with changes in the weather. There is, lack of water. Where I live in Las Vegas, we're running out of water. And if California next door runs out of water, that's like where a lot of our food comes from in the United States. When there's drought, when there's bad weather, when there's climate change, of course there's going to be economic repercussions, and that scares people. We're going through a pandemic right now, just like the people in Salem were going through a smallpox epidemic. There's issues with race going on where people are like fighting with the natives. Today we have people that are still fighting over race today. And it's like, when people feel out of control, when people feel scared, when people feel like they don't have the answers that make sense to them, they become more susceptible to false teachers, grifters, people who have something to prove, and they get taken in by all sorts of crazy false doctrine, all sorts of just like misinformation, all sorts of lies. And what ends up happening, not only do they make a fool of themselves, but like real people end up dying. Real families get destroyed by this stuff. And what is this town known for? Is it known for the 15 months of the Salem witch trials versus like the 400 zillion years that this town has been here and all of the good things that have happened? No, the only thing that it's really known for is the 15 years of just absolute foolery going on. And now it's a hotbed of like occultism, the exact opposite of what these people were trying to establish. But because people didn't have discernment, because people were swayed by false teachers and were caught up in this like frenzy of conspiracy theories and lies and just fear, a spirit of fear. Like, we see what has taken root in this place. And I just see the same thing happening today. People are leery of those who are in need, people who are, uh, you know, poor, indigent, sick, women, maybe not necessarily that religious, whatever. And all of a sudden it just becomes this free-for-all of like, there's a cabal of witches out and they're trying to get us, and they're the reason my foot is swollen, and they're the reason my cow is dead, and they're the reason, the economy's going to pot and all this other stuff. And it's just like, let's remember that we live in a fallen world and bad things are going to happen. And it doesn't mean that people are witches. It doesn't mean that, there's a secret cabal out there. It just means that we live in a fallen world. And bad things are going to happen. That's just part of living in this world. And we have to be willing to stand up when we see people acting like lunatics and tell them you're acting like lunatics. Because if we don't, real people, just like the ones memorialized here today, are going to die. And we see more than 700,000 people in the United States have died just in the past 2 years from plague. And there are so many conspiracies going around about it, and it's just like, literally the witch trials were the QAnon of the 1600s. And I just see so many Christians like falling into the same trap as the people in Salem did. They're confused, they're scared, the world's changing, the climate's changing, and they feel out of control, and false teachers capitalize on it, and they end up destroying entire cities. They end up destroying entire people's lives. And it's so sad. And it wasn't until 2001 that the state of Massachusetts actually exonerated all of the final people who were unjustly put to death for witchcraft. 2001. These people were executed in 1692 and 93. It took that long for them to be exonerated. And it's just like, imagine what happened to their families when they're losing the breadwinner, their parents. I mean, imagine being 6 years old and being thrown into prison because some random who has a beef with your mom because she's poor claims that you're a witch and you're 6 years old, and they throw you into prison. And you see your infant sibling die in prison. Like, what is that going to do to you? She was psychologically messed up for her entire life. And that is why it is so important to call out false teachers, to call out people who have a conflict of interest when they are preaching another gospel. Like, hey, I see that you're in bed with these politicians or this fancy family or whatever who has a lot of sway in the community. Are you still teaching the gospel, or are you promoting things that are beneficial to this family? Like, there's two separate issues going on. But number 3, we have to be willing to have these hard conversations with our friends and family when we see them getting wrapped up in craziness, because like maybe they're traumatized. Maybe they were like some of the false accusers who had experienced famine. They've experienced their entire families being massacred in these like Native American wars against the Europeans. Yeah, that's going to be traumatizing, but we can't just ignore it. We still have to make sure that we get them help. They didn't have the ability to get help back then, but we do today. These people had basically the equivalent of PTSD. They're having these like psychosomatic traumatic events where it's like they're hallucinating, or they're having delusions that they're being hurt or touched, or they're seeing things. And when we know that people are dealing with PTSD, we need to get them help. Like, your friends, their family. If you need to have an intervention with them, you need to have an intervention with them, because you don't want them getting wrapped up in this garbage. And so many people in the church today have dealt with trauma they've experienced trauma and they never get help for it, and that's why they become so susceptible for all of these like grifters and false teachers, because they're looking for somebody who has answers, who cares about them, that makes them feel like they're loved. And really they're just being used as pawns for, other people's financial gain and to puff up their own pride and ego. And it's just exhausting. Okay, somebody said this is bollocks, judging people. We literally have the testimony of what happened to these people. We know that, like, the Reverend was one of the few survivors of many of these wars with the natives. We know that many of the people who supposedly confessed under duress, where they were literally tortured to death. There are people who, of course, if you put them on a rack, of course, if you start breaking their fingers, of course, if you start threatening them or poking them with hot pokers, they will say anything to get you to stop torturing them. That's why confessions under duress are bull. Like, I don't know why anybody would take it seriously, because clearly there's an ulterior motive for getting these confessions out of people. It's not because you care about the truth. It's you want a specific outcome. You want them to say something in a certain way, so that's why you're torturing them to death. So seriously, goodbye. So anyway, you guys, it's exhausting. Please. Some of these people were absolutely crazy. Some of these people had PTSD. Some of these people like the attention, especially when it's like, hey, you know what? I'm like maybe they're a slave, maybe they're a woman, and they didn't have a voice in that time period or in that denomination because, women were looked down upon. And then all of a sudden now people want to hear what they have to say. They want to, all the attention's on them. Like, oh wow, you're seeing witches? What's going on? People like the attention. They like feeling important. They like feeling like people want to hear what they have to say. So again, that feeds into their ego. We have to be cognizant of these things, not only in our friends and family, but ourselves too, to make sure that we're not getting wrapped up in a bunch of insanity where we've forgotten that we need to practice discernment so that we don't get wrapped up in crazy conspiracies that end people's lives. So anyway, the street noise is getting really crazy and I think my battery's about to die. So I will talk to you guys later. Love you guys lots. Bye.